Welcome to Real Crime Stories. Sit back, relax, and enjoy the rain as you dive into tonight's chilling tale. If you love true crime and horror, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to support the channel. Now, turn off the lights, and let the story begin. Story. There's an active serial killer in northern Nevada. That's the most logical explanation. Before you call bullshit, here's a news article about it. At the very least, something is causing people to disappear along the desolate stretches of I-80. And I need to share an encounter I had that might confirm this theory as true. For privacy and security reasons, all names have been changed or removed. Here goes nothing. My brother Luke and I were driving from Salt Lake City to Reno for the hell of it. He'd just graduated high school and I was home from college in Colorado. Our dad had given us a couple $100 and told us to go have fun. Here's the thing. Luke's a good kid but has been deeply depressed ever since our mom passed. He wanted to get out of town, see some stars, contemplate life, the universe, everything in the wide expanse of the desert. And when he asked me to come with, I happily obliged. Luke was really into that outrun, vaporwave scene. So I suggested that we played like we were in the 80s for the ride out, and he enthusiastically agreed. I packed up our dad's old 1989 Jeep Wrangler and Luke brought a bunch of paper maps and cassette tapes. We silenced our phones, high-fived, and took off a couple hours before the sun went down with the intention of driving through the night. We weren't afraid and figured it would be relatively safe. We thought leaving at night was a good idea. We thought we'd skip the heat and the other cars and the stress. That was our first mistake. We made it 2 hours into the desert with no problems, traveling down I-80 at a smooth 85 miles per hour. Luke seemed to be enjoying himself. The music was turned up and the windows were rolled down. Above us the stars were just starting to come out and the sun sank. Blood red. Into the west, we stopped for food at a little cafe in a town called West Wendover. We both got the poncho special and dug in, leaving about an hour later. By this time, it was starting to get dark, real dark, and the Wrangler's brights barely lit up the deep shadow around us. Clouds had swept in, covering any light from the sky, making the desert seem claustrophobic and spooky. Luke joked that it was the perfect setting for a slasher flick. I laughed and told him to shut up. We stopped in Carlin for gas. The station we pulled into wasn't run down or sketchy or worrisome. In fact, it was lit by bright fluorescent and a few semi-trucks were parked off to the side. Luke asked me if he thought they were in there banging hookers. I rolled my eyes and went inside to pay and use the bathroom. Asking him if he wanted anything, snacks, coffee, things like that, he declined, said he didn't need to pee, and decided to stay outside with the Wrangler. By the time I got back out I knew something was wrong. Luke was quiet. He seemed spooked. "You okay?" I asked him, hopping up into the Wrangler. He simply shook his head. His eyes were watery and I wondered if he'd been crying. "You sure? We can turn back. Hey, it's okay to be sad. Okay? I'm here for you. I'm always here for you. I won't be mad if you want to go back." Luke sighed and finally said, "That guy." "What guy?" I looked around us. The station was still empty. with the exception of the few trucks parked off to the side. He inhaled, then exhaled. While you were in there, this guy came up to me and told me I'm going to die tonight. What the hell? Seriously? Where'd he go? Luke shrugged. Do you want to stay here for the night? Should I call the cops? Tell the gas dude? Luke shook his head. No, no, no. It's okay. Probably just fucking with me. What did he look like? Again. Luke just shrugged. Normal. Maybe in his 30s or 40s. I dunno. Forget it. Okay, well, did he have a car? No, he walked up, pounded on the window, said that, then walked away. Where? Luke gestured with his head towards the only entrance to the gas station. That way. Turned right. East, I mean. Well, I said, good thing we're going west. It'll be okay. Okay? Luke nodded. We can stop anytime and go back. Okay? He nodded again. All right, let's go. Should get there way early in the morning. But we'll see the sunset, so that's something. Luke didn't respond. I pulled out of the gas station. Wary. But not too worried. People can be crazy. People can be jerks. People can be evil. That was our second mistake. We drove that way for the next hour, in silence. The only time Luke spoke was to ask if we could turn the music off. And that made the ride so much spookier. Just driving in silence through the bleak nothingness of the desert. Without stars. Without much light. I asked Luke if he was okay a few times, and every time he just nodded. About an hour after leaving Carlin, Luke spoke up again. I have to piss, he said. I glanced over at him, sighed reluctantly, and replied, yeah, me too. I drank a lot of caffeine. Should we pull over? Luke tried to hide the fear in his voice. But it was there. I dunno. Your phone working? He checked it. No service. Is yours? Nah. Well, the map says there's a station like an hour-ish away. He said, folding the map over and leaning closer to it. I can just hold it. I guess. I began. I looked in the rear view and around us. We were completely alone. No lights. No signs of civilization. Just an open expanse of desert and a moody, dark sky. I think it'll be okay if we stopped. We should make it quick though. Luke looked around too. He looked worried, but he said, rather bravely, yeah, I think it'll be okay. This was our third mistake. And you know what they say, 3 strikes. You're out. I slowed the Wrangler to a stop, pulled over into the dirt shoulder, and killed the engine, leaving the keys in the ignition. I left the headlights and hazards on too, just in case. Being a woman, surprise. I'm a chick. I wanted to get out farther in the field to do my thing. I didn't want Luke to see or hear me. I found a good spot across the road down a small hill and crouched down behind some shrubbery. Luke had gone off on the side of the road we'd pulled off on. Out of my eyesight. It happened so fast. I was doing my thing when I heard this weird inhuman laughter and then the engine of the Wrangler. I pulled my shorts up and ran back towards the road. I could see the headlights rapidly disappearing into the night, leaving me in almost pitch blackness. It drove maybe a little more than 50 feet, then jerked to a stop. I ran towards it, screaming, Luke, you asshole, what the fuck? And then, whistling, coming from the left of me. It didn't sound like a bird call. 3 notes. High, low, in between. I spun around, but I couldn't see shit through the darkness. I decided to ignore it and continued towards the Jeep. Luke, this isn't fucking funny. The engine revved and it burned rubber before taking off again. This time pulling a sharp left, crossing the median, and disappearing into the desert. 1 second it was there. The next both the headlights and sound of the engine just poof vanished. And then I heard him. Luke. He was screaming. Leia, Leia, oh, God. His voice suddenly stopped. The silence was so loud it stung. I was crying by this point. Standing in the middle of the road staring at the direction the car had gone. There was another whistle. High, low, in between. Then another bark of inhuman, demonic laughter. It sounded close. I stared into the darkness. Tears blurring my vision. Trying to see what had made it when I heard a rumbling sound behind me. An engine. One single headlight was coming directly at me and I stood frozen like some dumb prey in the middle of the road before taking off into the desert, hoping to lose whoever it was. I wasn't thinking. I was scared. I thought I was going to die. Whoever was following me was also yelling at me, telling me to stop or slow down. I can't quite remember. The engine and light both grew in intensity until I realized that running was futile and turned around to face my pursuer. It was a man on a motorcycle. He was wearing all black, helmet, gloves, pants, shirt, jacket, boots. He stopped a few yards behind me, kicked the stand out, and killed the engine. Swiftly, he pulled off his helmet and started walking towards me, leaving the one motorcycle headlight on. It lit up a circle of desert around us and cast him in deep shadow. A brighter, smaller light flashed into my face and I realized he was holding up a flashlight. "Hey," he said, "you okay?" I didn't respond, and he continued walking towards me. "Saw you running down the road. Didn't mean to scare you. Do you need help?" "Hey," he said softer, now within arm's reach. "Are you okay? What are you doing out here alone? Your car break down? I didn't see one around. How long have you been out here?" He lowered the light from my face and I saw him a little more clearly. Middle-aged, wood-colored hair, trimmed. I took a few steps back, then said, "Please don't hurt me." A mix of emotions crossed his face. Shock, pity, sadness, a dash of curiosity. He suddenly reached for something in his back pocket. I cringed backwards and whimpered a bit. He saw this and slowly removed his hand, then held them both up. A gesture that said, "I'm not dangerous. Hey, I'm not going to hurt you. Okay? Just going to reach into my pocket for my ID." I blinked at him. There wasn't much I could do to protect myself except run. So I did. Behind me I heard the man mutter something like "Goddammit" before giving chase. I was fast, but he was faster, and I soon felt his hand close around my upper arm and spin me around to face him. He quickly grabbed my other arm too and clamped down, holding me in place. He was strong. I screamed bloody murder. He shook me a little and said, "Hey, hey, calm down, okay? I'm not here to hurt you. I'm a federal agent. I'm going to show you my ID." He spoke calmly and slow, released one of my arms, and reached back again. I used this as an opportunity to punch him as hard as I could in the face with my free hand. The grip of his other hand didn't budge. Instead, he just flinched, said, "Ow," and held up something thin and rectangular. It was an ID. Said FBI in big blue caps at the top of it. A photo of his face, unsmiling, was underneath it along with his name and a string of numbers. It looked fake and I was worried, so I stared him straight in the eyes and said, "Do you have a badge?" He nodded. "Sure do. In my jacket pocket. Hurts to sit on." He gestured with his head back in the direction of the motorcycle. "If I release you, you gonna take off?" I didn't respond. He sighed. "Okay. Just don't sock me again, goddamn." He inhaled deeply then let me go. I didn't move. He gave me a small smile. Exhaled. Then slowly reached into his jacket. It fluttered open for a moment and I saw a gun strapped into a shoulder holster. He noticed that I noticed but said nothing and didn't reach for it. Instead, he held his badge out for me to inspect. A semester ago, I'd learned how to recognize a fake badge from a real one. His was solid gold with the words Federal Bureau of Investigation engraved on it rather than just the acronym. Lady Justice, blind, holding up a scale and a torch, was embossed in the center. On either side of her were the letters U and S. At the bottom of the badge were the words Department of Justice. And at the very top was an eagle. It was indeed authentic. But the thing that made me believe him more than anything else was the fact he didn't hand it over to me. No federal agent would ever hand their badge over willingly. Just like that I trusted him. And I started to cry about everything that had happened that night. "Hey, hey, hey," the agent said calmly, placing a hand on my shoulder. "No one's gonna hurt you while I'm here. Take a deep breath, okay? I'm here to help. We'll figure this out. I'm going to call for backup. And then we're going to go back to the road and wait. Okay? I'll shoot several holes into anyone who tries anything. I'm a pretty good shot." He flashed the light around us briefly. And I gotta give him credit. He didn't look the least bit scared or, if he was, he wasn't showing it. I appreciated that. He slid out a slim black phone from his jacket, called in to the nearest city, gave his location, ID number and name, then explained that he couldn't give escort back into town since he only had one helmet. Nevada law requires all motorcycle riders to wear helmets. He hung up, turned to me, and said, "Come on, let's go. You can tell me everything. They're on their way. It's going to be okay." He handed me the flashlight, kicked his stand up, and started pushing his bike back towards the road, while I followed close behind. As we walked, I talked, and he kept an eye on our surroundings. As soon as we got back to the road, he pulled some flares out of his bike's saddlebags and set them up a few feet behind us, giving the area a sinister red glow. He hadn't said a word while I spoke, just listened and nodded and looked around, wary. "What were you doing out in the desert alone?" I suddenly asked, unable to stop myself. The agent glanced at me then looked back out into the darkened desert. "Investigating." "Investigating what?" The agent sighed. "Look, whatever happened to your brother, we'll find him. I know I can't say much to make this any better or easier, but I'm going to do my damnedest to figure out what's going on. We'll find him." I sniffled but said nothing. He glanced at me again and said, "Tell me about Luke. What's his favorite food, band, book?" So I told him and soon flashing lights appeared on the horizon framed by the first light of the rising sun. I was given an escort back into town inside a police car, where I gave my statement and called my dad. The agent who found me decided to stay back and search around. He told the cops he wouldn't need backup, but if they didn't hear from him by the end of the day, to send another patrol out. Back in town, the cops I spoke to thought my brother just ran away, dismissing and belittling his depression, saying that he probably just wanted some attention and took the car for a joyride. But the worst thing was they laughed, like they thought it was just all some big joke, like they thought depression was some big joke. The agent returned a few hours later with a car instead of a motorcycle and offered to drive me to Winnemucca Municipal Airport. I accepted. He was really the only person there I trusted. The only person there who I felt believed me. I told him what happened, what the cops did and said. He sighed, shook his head, and muttered, "Assholes." He glanced at me sharply and continued, "Don't tell anyone I said that. Or, if you do, just don't use my name." And, despite the situation, despite everything that had happened, I smiled and he threw me a roguish grin. I noticed he was developing a bruise from where I had punched him. After a few minutes, he spoke up again. "For what it's worth, I believe you. Everything you've said. About the guy who threatened your brother. About the laughter and the whistling. About your brother's depression. All of it. I'm on your side. And I'll do everything within my power to find Luke." I thanked him, then added, "Sorry for that. Sorry for punching you." He shrugged it off and said, "Hey, no sweat. You got one hell of a left hook. You should be proud." Before he left, he gave me his card. It was matte black with glossy black writing on it. Said the number on it was his own personal one and that I could call him anytime, even if it was just to talk. He told me to leave a message if he didn't answer and he'd get back to me as soon as he possibly could. Dad and I still have hope that Luke is out there somewhere. That he's still alive. I'm still in contact with the FBI agent. He's a real nice guy. Real empathetic and sincere. A good listener. But there's something else there, a sadness. Some of you might say that this isn't horrific because I was saved by the agent. But the thing is, those agents are fighting a losing battle. It's honestly horrifying. See, I did some research when I got home. When I asked the agent what was going on, what happened to Luke, and he just sighed and said we'd find him. Well, I don't think he wanted to tell me he was out there investigating something called a thrill kill. The Federal Bureau of Investigation has been collecting and compiling information on these thrill kills for decades. There's even a handy-dandy map of killings that have occurred on or around interstates across America. And if this experience, if that map, doesn't deter you, if you're still planning on driving at night through desolate stretches of any interstate, here's some advice. Never, ever let the tank get past half empty. Carry emergency flares and flashlights, a spare tire, a jack, and all the necessary tools. A backup phone battery and charger. Perhaps mace, a knife, or a taser, or gun if you are damn careful with it and are legally allowed to carry. Make sure to tell people where you are and where you will be in the event you lose your phone signal, and never, ever stop to help anyone stopped on the side or in the middle of the road. Call the police as soon as possible. Give your location, and keep going if you can. If you can't, turn around. Don't look back, and don't stop until you get to a city. Story. My unsolved cases. The Dancing Man. I've been in working as a private detective ever since I got my degree in criminal justice at UGA. I was lucky. Most people don't become a detective for at least 10 years after they've joined the force. But because of the people I knew, I got to do what I loved right out the gate. I decided to join with the force about 15 years ago. The pay was less, but the benefits were good. Now when I was a private detective, all I had to worry about was who stole the TV. Or how some drug addict 2 states away got my client's credit card info. It was mundane stuff. And I say that not to be cocky, but because what I have been working on with the force far exceeds anything I've done in my private work. During my first 4 years with the force, I began work in a small county in Georgia. After about 3 years, I grew a reputation as one of the best in the business. And that's when the calls started flowing in from all over the country. This is when things started getting interesting. I'm not saying interesting as in solving well-known cases. I'm saying interesting because of the lack of people that knew about these cases. Every now and then I would get these cases that I couldn't solve. Most of the evidence would be from a panicked 911 call. And then a post-mortem search of the victim's property. I have about 20 or so cases, each one of them different from the last, so I guess I'll just go in order. The first unsolved case I got, in the force we call these UEs unsolved enigmas, was from Austin, Texas. This man had called 911 at around 2 a.m. I will just copy the call's transcript so I don't have to paraphrase. Operator. 911. What's your emergent? Victim. Name blurred out. Yes, hello. Hello? My name is, and I don't think I'm in any imminent danger. But I am freaked out. Operator. Sir, where are you? Victim. Yes, I'm on Lavaca Street, right next to the park. Operator. Okay, sir. What's your emergency? Victim. Okay, well, I was just going for my nightly run when I saw this man. I barely caught a glimpse of him, because he was on a children's playground behind some bars. Well, he was moving violently. So I turned to look at him. And he was just dancing. Operator. Dancing, sir? Victim. Yes, ma'am. But it wasn't just some regular dance. It was some tribal thing. I would have just passed it off as him being drunk. But this dance was violent. His arms were flailing so sporadically. I thought he was going to break something. Ma'am, I'm having a hard time explaining to you how violently he was dancing. But anyways, he was looking up in the sky or something, stomping on the ground and waving his arms. I was concerned for him, so I called out, sir? He stopped his dance immediately, but refused to move any part of his body. It was like he had just froze. Operator. Sir? Victim. Oh, sorry. As I was saying, it was like he just froze in place. He literally didn't move a single muscle in his body. I called out again. Sir. Are you okay? Nothing. He just stayed perfectly still. I was a little unnerved at this point, so I just decided to keep walking. That's when I saw it. He started dancing again. This incredibly violent dance. It scared me just witnessing it. Operator. So what's the problem, sir? Are you in danger? Victim. Like I said, I don't think so. But here's what creeped me out the most. When I looked back at him, he was facing me. He was still in the same spot. Head still pointed towards the sky and body still frozen. But he was facing me. I looked away a couple other times, and every time it just led to the same result. I was too creeped out to keep looking away. So I called 911 for help. Operator. Are you still looking at him now, sir? Victim. Yes, ma'am. Operator. Okay, I'm sending a squad car. They will be there momentarily. I need you to stay on the phone with me. Can you do that? Victim. Yes, ma'am. Operator. Okay. How close are you to him? Victim. I'm about 30 yards away. Operator. Okay. So what's he doing right now? Victim. He's just standing there, completely frozen. Operator. Okay, I want you to get a little further. Victim. Oh my God. What the food? The beginning of this sentence was unbearably loud. The call becomes fuzzy for a second because of how loud this man screams. Also, the scream at the end diminished as he was screaming. Because he was, we believe, being dragged away from his phone. Operator. Sir? Sir, I heard footsteps. Are you all right, sir? The call continues for another 3 minutes. All the while the operator is yelling sir, trying to get the man to respond. It is dropped when the officer arrives on the scene and finds the cell phone. I flew out to Austin because I was told I needed to investigate a possible kidnapping and murder. Right when I got there, they gave me a rundown of what happened and presented me with that transcript as evidence. They told me the police officer didn't find much on the scene. But they told me they would take me there immediately. When I got there, the place was tapped off. And I searched around for about 2 hours. We didn't find anything of interest at the scene. Or anywhere else for that matter. Things went on like this for about a week. And then we got a call from some panicked schoolteacher. She told us there was a body behind the cafeteria dumpsters. This school was about 2 blocks over from where the incident occurred. And we eventually identified the body as the victim of the dancing man incident. As it has come to be known as. I understand why this schoolteacher was freaking out. This body was mangled horribly. Every limb he had was twisted backwards. His head looked like how he sounded in his last phone call. Completely horrified. His eyes were open, mouth-wide, and oddly, no blood. Whoever did this twisted this man to death. He didn't beat him, nor did he choke him. He just broke every bone in his body until the man died of a heart attack from the panic he was under. Thinking about that body still gives me chills to this day. And we haven't found another piece of evidence since. I thought eventually another case would arise. Some panicked person staring at a perfectly still man. But nothing. It's been almost 2 decades and not even a public mention of the dancing man. The only people who know about it are the people the local police station told. And the detectives on the case. Some officers began to tell their friends. And the story spread. But not much past Austin. I still wonder what that victim was thinking when he saw that man dancing. That's all I can write about now. I'll try and share some more stories as I get more free time. I just retired and I'm looking for ways to spend all this newfound spare time. Story. I think my friend became too obsessed with some local unresolved murder cases. Police were unable to locate the missing children until 3 p.m. the next day. They didn't even know the exact location where they'd set up camp the night before. It was the smell of rot in the hot air that ultimately led them to the tent which the boys had pitched next to the creek. Seth leaned forward in his seat. He had his finger in front of him, reading the article aloud while he followed line by line with his finger. The blue light from his triple monitor setup glowed in his glaring eyes. All 3 youths were found with the crumpled and tattered remains of the tent collapsed on top of them. Their bodies had been beaten over and over with a blunt weapon which authorities are yet to locate. It's speculated 3 14-year-old boys were already dead before the unknown assailant, still at large, started stabbing at their bodies repeatedly through the fabric. I turned away from him before he could glance over and make eye contact. I sat on the edge of his bed and then lay all the way down. I wondered when he'd last washed his sheets. Over a month at least. It was only to be expected. No one around to impress when you've deliberately turned yourself into a social recluse. Of course, it had become my responsibility to address the issue. I suppose his mother had exhausted all the nagging techniques she could muster over the past couple weeks before she decided to try giving me a call. In fairness, I'd known Seth since in middle school. He'd always been one to experience his temporary bouts of timidness and introversion, but this was taking it to the next level. When you go nearly 4 weeks only traveling to and from work and stay locked in your room on the weekend, ignoring all texts and calls, bailing on plans you've already made, there's a problem there. Something is lingering beneath the surface. It's terrifying, isn't it? Seth said. He narrowed his head closer to the screens. The more I research it, the more I see what a high frequency of murders and disappearances this area has. We're more than 12 times the national average. Where did you get this figure? Seth, I've been super into these cases recently. Obsessed? Whatever you want to call it. It's just impossible to ignore once you lay it out in front of you. It's almost like they are neatly distributed among the surrounding townships throughout the county. Like they've been spread out just far enough so no one could piece it all together on first glance. I'm starting to think I should be a detective or something. I'd be really good at this line of work. Either that or you'll end up one of the unsolved mysteries yourself. I tried to say it as jokingly as I could, hoping I would get some kind of light-hearted response out of him. Of course, he gave me none. It was almost as if he didn't even hear me. All he could see was the murder article on his computer. I checked his bedside table. The digital alarm clock had just turned to 7 and that meant that we were starting to run out of time. We needed to be headed back to my place to start pre-drinking within the hour so we could get a good buzz on before we met up with the other guys downtown. I grabbed a mini football and started throwing it up and down. Do you remember the Johnny Falco case? He asked. He started clicking through more articles bringing different news reports onto his screens. If I were to pour you a shot of whiskey right here and right now, would you take it? He scoffed at me and waved the back of his hand at me. Do you remember the Falco case? No. I don't understand how people just forget these things. He said and shook his head. It wasn't even 18 months ago. Happened a little bit outside downtown. He was walking his dog. Past tons of witnesses who confirmed they saw him. He goes over the Huntington Bridge and is never seen on the busy street from the other side. So what, Seth? So what? The railings are like 6 feet high. You could only get over them if you tried. So maybe he did try? Yes. That's what you, the police, and everyone else in town seems to think. Just weird that when they found his body downriver at the dam 3 days later, there was light bruising around his eyes and his forehead. So you think someone beat him up and tossed him over? Yes. And I think they took his dog with them afterwards. They never found it. And this just happened randomly in broad daylight? Broad daylight. Yes. Randomly? No, I really don't think so. Come here and check this out. I tossed the football from hand to hand and then finally decided to sit up. I scooched to the end of the bed to get a closer look. What do you think of this picture? He said. It was a black and white photo of two men. One was Falco. I could recognize his face from other articles he had opened. He was dressed in a tux and stood in front of a boardroom table, shaking hands with an old man. Whoever that man was, he had a really abnormal look about him. The kind you would take a second glance at if you saw them on the street. He had bulging, almost rectangular-shaped eyes pulled to the far sides of his face like a hammerhead shark. His flat head was completely bald and covered in liver spots. Gray and curly hair lined the sides of his head. His crooked smile was missing teeth all over. What's significant about this picture? Is this some sort of special article? It's not from an article. I found it myself. I peered down at Seth from the corners of my eyes. The way he was still so fixated on the screens unnerved me. Such attention to detail on any particular subject required some level of unhealthy obsession. And I wasn't convinced this fascination would necessarily yield positive results. You found it on your own? Yes. And it's fucking creepy. Right? It's not the only thing that's creepy. It's also not a one-of-a-kind image. Here, check this out. His head darted between the three monitors. His fingers scaled the keyboard while he typed in the three boys' names from the tent murder case and brought up their Facebook pages and then started scrolling through them. He searched through the photos of deceased children. He scrolled over the well wishes and sentimental posts from friends and loved ones. He passed them by like they were nothing. Mere inconveniences slowing him down from where he needed to go. All of this happened while I stood silent over his shoulder. I needed to get out of that room. I had to think of an excuse to leave and then call his mother on the way home and make sure she fully understood the extent of her only son's social and mental issues. This had progressed well past the point where a talk with an old friend could fix things. This needed to be addressed by a professional. There, he yelled out so loud it startled me and snapped me back into focus. He had a picture of one of the boys in his school uniform. He was at what looked to be some kind of fun run or some other outdoor charity event. He was on a soccer field with students and parents all over the place. He stood right in the center of the photo. His face definitely one of the boys pictured in the tent murder article. He stood separated from the other children and shook hands with the same creepy-looking man from Falco's boardroom picture. The old man was dressed in the same button-up shirt and corduroy slacks. A cold shiver ran down from my neck to my lower back. I needed to sit on his bed again to collect myself. Is that the same guy? Yes. How did you find this? Research. It's possible it's a coincidence. You know, 10,000 people in town. Not that big of a place. You think so? He said. He started clicking wildly again. This time bringing up the articles of someone I did know. Uri Malarkey. He'd transferred to our school last year and was fitting in super well until he died in a car accident driving home from a party over Christmas break. You're not going to show me what I think you're going to show me. He opened Uri's Facebook page and scrolled through his photos. And sure enough, he'd found it. He stood on the sideline in full gear during a football game at his old school. A wall of coaching staff was lined up behind him. Sure enough, that same old man was there leaning over and shaking his hand. I didn't know what to say. I was at a loss. The fact that we had even stumbled upon this was something that should have never happened. The fact that such a connection could even exist was so hard to fathom. Yet there it was, right in front of me. "Glass of water?" he said quietly. There was a certain pride in his voice, like he was so proud of the fact he'd brought this to my attention. "Why? Yes." He expanded the 3 images individually to each monitor. Then he got up and left. It sounded like there was skip in his step as he made his way down the hall and towards the kitchen. I stared hard at all 3 photos. My eyes could only stay on each one for so long. It was just so intimidating. Something about that man shaking the different murder victims' hands seemed so foreign. Like he wasn't meant to actually be there. Then it struck me. There was something physically off about all 3 pictures. The man. He wasn't only dressed in the same clothes each time. The way his body leaned and oriented itself to the victim, it was the mirror image of the same position. Then I noticed the blurred lines. Pixels around his edges. It was so subtle, so carefully done that I likely wouldn't have been able to notice unless I had been staring at all 3 pictures blown up on the monitors and laid out side by side. Those photos had been altered. That man felt off because he wasn't actually in any of those images. He'd been superimposed there. What exactly had Seth done? Had he photoshopped the pictures himself and found a way to get them up on these dead people's Facebook pages? Had he tricked me somehow, and the truth was he had them saved on his computer all along? Was this some sick and twisted joke to freak me out? What else could his motivation possibly be? It was no longer a priority to get him out for a night of drinking with the boys. The only thing that mattered to me in that moment was getting out of that house and putting as much distance between me and him as possible. I stormed out of his room just as he returned with 2 glasses of water. I jogged over to the door and started putting on my shoes. "In a hurry?" he said. "Was hoping you would stick around and we could discuss? Maybe dive deeper into some theories about this man? Got to get back. Should I still come meet up with you guys at the Bull?" Sure. Actually, I don't know. I'll have to check if the guys are still thinking of going out." I slammed the door and ran all the way home. I didn't care who saw me or how silly I looked. I needed to be away from Seth. I was ecstatic to not hear from Seth and safely assumed he'd chosen to bail on us in the end that night. I wound up drinking myself into oblivion at the bar. I needed the escape. I wouldn't have felt comfortable enough to take an Uber back out to the suburbs by myself and sleep comfortably in my own bed without it if I hadn't been so wasted. I think I could have slept into 4 or 5 in the afternoon the next day if I hadn't been woken up by my mother shaking me. She was on the verge of tears, saying something terrible had happened and that the police were at the door and needed to speak to me right away. They would question me briefly there and then eventually bring me down to the station to make sure they could get the most thorough and accurate series of events from the night before while it was still fresh in my mind. When I ran out of Seth's house the night before, it was apparently the last time anyone had seen him alive. He'd inexplicably decided that instead of coming out for a night of drinking, he would rather go for a midnight swim in the quarry on the other side of town. This was despite the fact he could hardly swim and even decided not to mention anything to his parents or anyone else. They found his clothes resting on top of his shoes next to the water. His body was at the bottom. Minor bruising all over his midsection. I told them everything exactly as it happened. Even all the insanity he'd displayed along with his extensive research and photoshopped pictures. Not that any of it would end up proving useful in the subsequent investigation. They held his funeral the next Saturday. It was a drizzly day. Patron's suits and dresses were soaked through. They held it at the cemetery built a little downriver from the Huntington Bridge. There was a photo display set up inside the main doors of the church. So many memories of the two of us and our group of friends were immortalized on that corkboard. I could have spent hours looking at it and reminiscing on the good times we had before his very sudden decline into self-exclusion and mysterious cause of death. My eyes traveled over all the photos until they stopped dead on the one on the bottom right corner. It wasn't pinned on like the others. This one had a couple staples running through it. My legs literally collapsed beneath me. My father had to rush over in a panic to pick me up. The photo was from inside his bedroom. The 3 monitors on his desk had familiar news articles on them. I lay flat on his bed, with a mini football in my hands. The digital alarm clock read 7 p.m. Seth sat at the end of the bed, right next to my feet. He looked sad, staring into the camera. Not like the old days when their no murder obsession was on his mind. On his right sat the same old man in the same old clothes and grinned at the camera too. He leaned and shook Seth's hand. I stared at it as intently as I could. That picture had not been photoshopped. Story. Something twisted my brother's head clean off. I found out what it was. I wasn't the one that found Maddie. It was his wife, Elizabeth, back from a night shift at the hospital, eager to shed her scrubs and settle in for a long sleep. Instead, she walked into the bedroom to find Maddie sitting in a chair, his severed head in his lap. I would have preferred not to hear any further details about my brother's body. But when Elizabeth called me on the phone, hysterical, she couldn't help but overshare. Dark bruises covering his arms and legs. There was blood everywhere, soaking through his white t-shirt and striped pajama pants, pooling all around the wicker chair where he sat. The skin of his neck was frayed where it had been ripped apart, almost like a popped balloon. The muscle, too, was stretched and torn, and the vertebrae stuck from the top of his neck hole like a white sleeping worm. Though we hadn't spoken much in the last few years, I was the only family Maddie had left. I caught the next flight to Boston and met up with Elizabeth at her parents' house. She started screaming as soon as she saw me. Or maybe she'd been screaming all day. Maybe I looked too much like my brother for her to handle. After a few hours, she calmed down enough to start saying a few words. I asked her if Maddie had been in any kind of trouble. He'd been reckless in his late teens and early 20s. Selling drugs on campus. It was small-time stuff. But he'd made a few bad enemies. Guys that put a real scare into him one night that made him get out of the game altogether. There was nothing like that. She said, he's totally clean. Got a good job clearing out old houses. Like, when someone dies, he gets all the junk out. Gets it sorted. Helps sort out the junk from the antiques. Takes a commission of the sales. Does he skim? I asked. Maybe someone felt cheated? She shook her head. He buys the stuff he likes. But it's always a fair price. Everybody loved him. Everybody. The cops investigated, of course. But there were no leads. No evidence of a break-in. No one with a grudge. It was like Matty had twisted his own head off and set it in his lap. One of the detectives mentioned that more than half of murders go unsolved. It seemed this would be one of them. Weeks passed, and I stuck around, trying to help Elizabeth put her life back together. Even after the police were done scouring her place, she refused to go back in. We hired some people to clean up the blood, but they told me there was only so much they could do. The hardwood in the bedroom would never give up that stain. Finally, it fell on me to go into the place and gather a few of Elizabeth's things. They were going to put it up for sale. She was still in pieces. Planning to move back in with her parents. Probably permanently. I rented a truck and some basic tools. Told her I'd get to work. Up until that point, I'd been staying in a cheap Airbnb nearby. But with Matty's house reopened, I figured I could spend a few nights there while I packed up. When I mentioned the idea, Elizabeth gave me a weird look. "You shouldn't stay there," she said. "Why not?" I asked. But she couldn't come up with a good reason. Of course, the day I got into the place, the first thing I did was head to the bedroom. I guess I just had to see it. The cleaners had clearly scrubbed the hell out of the place. But there was still a nasty stain in the center of the room. The mark was roughly circular and maybe 3 feet across. Mostly gray but grew darker at the edges. Almost black. Before she sold the house, Elizabeth would have to have the boards replaced. Maybe put in carpeting. Something. For a few seconds, I just stood there, looking at the black circle, imagining my brother inside it. Permanently. Once I'd spent a few moments staring, I looked up from the stain, really taking the place in for the first time. Elizabeth hadn't been kidding about the antiques. All over the apartment were old hutches and paintings of ships at sea. Sets of china and cigar store Indians. My brother had always had an eye for quality. The thing that really stuck with me, though, was a wood carving of an owl, which was standing right in the corner of their old bedroom. The thing was larger than life, coming all the way up to my shoulder, carved all of a single trunk of elm. It was one solid piece, save for a single, amber eye made of glass inlay. The other eyehole was empty, giving the odd impression that the carving was winking at you. The wood had been lacquered maybe a dozen times, leaving it with an uneven plastic sheen. Deep cracks ran through one of the wings and the neck, and the base was discolored from water damage. It certainly didn't look lifelike. Yet, somehow, it felt oddly alive. All afternoon as I packed boxes of Elizabeth's clothes and shoes, the eye followed me. I'm usually not the kind of guy to get spooked by anything. But I guess after everything that had happened to Matty, I got kind of on edge. Eventually, I threw an old towel over the carving's head, covering the eye. It felt a little stupid, but it made me feel a little better. A few hours went by. A bunch of boxes got packed, and it started to get dark. My first instinct was to sleep in the living room, away from the stain, and, honestly, away from the owl. I turned off the lights and stretched out on the couch. But it was old and lumpy. Impossible to get comfortable. Matty's mattress, practically brand new, lay untouched in the other room. Finally, after maybe an hour of rolling around, my back aching from the day of hard labor, I grabbed the blanket and headed for Maddie's old room, carefully walking around the black circle. As I tossed the blanket on the bed, I looked in the corner of the room at the owl carving. The towel I'd tossed over its head lay on the ground now. I wondered how it had fallen off. Maybe I'd been careless when I covered the statue in the first place. The eye caught the moonlight, watching, as stupid as it made me feel. I got up and walked over, picking the towel off the floor. As I did, I heard a distinct sound, something like rats' feet skittering inside the owl. I jumped back halfway to the bed, still holding the towel in my hand. For a moment, I stared at the carving, daring it to move, waiting for another sound. Nothing. The whole time, though, even as I was watching it, the amber eye watched me. Slowly, I walked back to the carving and threw the towel over it. Then, I backed across the room to the bed, not quite realizing I was stepping through the black circle on the floor. Finally, I collapsed onto the mattress, curled under the blanket and fell asleep. I woke to a cracking sound. At first, everything was still. Then, through the moonlit near dark of the room, I watched as the owl statue began to move. First, its left wing pushed out from inside. Then its right. The wood pushed out perhaps 5 inches, revealing something black and skeletal inside. It looked almost like the Transformers Maddie and I had played with as kids. Unseen robots pushing out through the plastic panels of a vehicle to reveal their hidden, shiny bones. I lay transfixed as 2 thin, black legs pushed out hidden panels near the owl's base. The black legs at least. They seemed like legs couldn't have been much wider than a curtain rod. They pushed all the way down to the floor. Then, the whole carving began to move toward me. The wood swayed on some unseen thing inside it. Some too thin creature wearing the wooden owl-like armor. I looked for a way out. I could have jumped through the window. But I was on the 2nd floor. And the thing was moving too fast now anyway. As it reached the bed, it reached out, its thin, black arms growing impossibly long, its hands flattening and growing wide like dinner plates. Then it placed them over my ears and everything went black. I woke to find myself sitting on a wooden chair from the kitchen. The owl must have brought it in while I was passed out. It had placed me inside the black circle. I thought of Maddie, sitting here just like me. Not that long ago. I tried to move, but the long black rods that I'd assumed were the owl's legs bound my ankles to the chair. Its hands still gripped my head, their grip only slightly more relaxed than when it had first grasped me. The carving itself stood only a few inches in front of me. Though it fixed me with its amber eye, I could see now that the other eye hole was now open, revealing something black and moving inside. "What are you?" I asked, barely able to speak. I think it laughed. At least, it sounded a little like a laugh. "I'm not quite an owl," it said. Its voice was low, echoing out through the cracks in the owl's wooden shell. "I'm not quite a person either. Some days I feel closer to bird, some days closer to man. But actually, I've been around long before owls ever flew." Of course, it continued, owls are generally far less interesting than humans. They're basic creatures. Give them a moonlit night and a field full of frightened mice, and they'll be happy, so happy, every single time. For humans, nothing is ever enough. It clicked its tongue, then got quiet. But there is one area in which owls truly excel, which I have always admired. It said, they are fantastic at turning their heads. So much better than humans. It's an area where it's not even a competition. Not even close. As it said this, I felt the pressure from its plate-like hands increase against my temples. And it turned my neck about 90 degrees to the right. Not enough to hurt exactly. But it was certainly uncomfortable. I thought of Matty. His head twisted clean off and set carefully in his lap. Why are you doing this? I asked. Because as I said, humans are interesting, but also frustrating. Not to belabor the comparison to owls. But truly, your eyesight is quite poor. And not just your night vision. Your ability to see yourselves is quite abysmal. Watching you with only one eye, I can see truths about you that you simply cannot face. What the fuck are you talking about? I screamed. It held a black finger to its beaks. Shushing me. Please. It said, if you must scream, wait until you really must. Later in the game. It may be unavoidable. Game? I whispered. It's one of my own invention. Though it's not too different than some human games. A little bit truth or dare. A little bit mercy. Mostly mercy. The rules aren't complicated. I'll be telling you some truths about your life. Unpleasant truths. Each truth will come with a bit of pain. Both mental and physical. When you've had enough, simply speak the word mercy. And your pain will be over. And my head will be in my lap. I said, very good. It said, I knew you were a smart one. In that case, it sounds like no further explanation will be needed. Except that I should add, the result of this exercise will be inevitable. You will eventually beg for mercy. Out of compassion, I'll go ahead and offer you an opportunity to ask for it right now. Just to spare yourself the pain ahead. For a moment, I considered the offer. It would be easy to let it simply do what it wanted. To give my head one great, final twist. That would be it. Nothing would hurt after that. But something in me wasn't ready to let go. No, I said, not yet. Deep from within the owl's wooden head, the dark thing looked out at me. Then, it seemed to nod. I felt its impossibly strong hands tighten around my head and began to turn it. Perhaps 10 more degrees to the right. It was definitely past the point of uncomfortable now. Along with this physical pain, I'll be stating a truth that carries a similar amount of mental anguish. Said the dark, thin thing. I would like to start by saying that you were never a good brother. As a boy, you were the golden child, taking all of your mother's love, allowing a narrative to develop that your brother was the eternal fuck-up. Though you pretended to be kind to him, secretly, deep down you were happy to play the role of the favored son. Sometimes, it even made you happy to hear your mother ranting at him, refusing him meals as he cried in his room, knowing that his misdeeds only made you look all the better. No, I said, trying to wriggle my neck free. Is that what Maddie said? I was a good brother. After Mom used to tear into him, I'd go to his room, bring him snacks when she threw his dinner in the trash. I took care of him. The thing's hands tightened around my head, turning it ever farther. That happened once or twice. Said the thing. It was little comfort to your brother. More often than not, he went to sleep hungry, well aware that no one loved him, least of all you. I wanted to say more, but I knew it would only bring pain. I held my tongue. Even in adulthood, You let your brother flounder. It said, it would have been so easy to help him out with a few $1,000s. You knew he was destitute, selling drugs to make ends meet. He would have blown that money in a week. I said, might have gone on a bender. Gotten himself killed. No, it shouted, growing angry at me now. You were selfish. You wanted to see him twist in the wind. You wanted to be superior. It twisted my neck 5 more degrees. I could feel the skin growing tight as it twisted, the muscles beneath straining against the black hands. Why are you even here? It asked. You never visited when he was alive. Perhaps it actually frustrated you to see him getting his life together. Or is it Elizabeth? You always felt she was too good for Maddie. But you always secretly had a little crush. Didn't you? Maybe now that's he's dead. No, I said, and hot tears were starting to roll down my face. I was just trying to be a good brother. I swear. Too late. The thing shouted. Too late. It twisted my head again. I felt a wetness on my skin and wondered if I had begun to bleed. Mercy. The thing shouted. Simply say the word and this will all be over. Your brother suffered far less. I'm sorry, Matty, I said, just talking into the dark. I'm sorry. I did my best. I really did love you. Always. Mercy, shouted the thing. Just keep going, I said, it'll be over soon enough. But I'll never ask for it. Never. As I said the words, the first rays of sun cut through the drawn shades. Where the rays struck the thing's hands, there was a smoky smell. Mercy. Quick, or it'll only hurt worse, shouted the thing. But there was a note of fear in its tone now. Go ahead then, I said, but it didn't. The sun shone more brightly. Slowly, the pressure on my temples began to ease. The black limbs withdrew. The owl began to back away into its corner. By the time dawn had fully flooded the room, the carving was back in place. That morning, I returned to Elizabeth's parents' house with a few boxes of her things. I must have looked pretty wrecked, because she asked how I was doing, a note of concern in her voice. I'm okay, I said, but I can't stay here anymore. I've got to get home. She nodded, understanding. I've been thinking about it, she said, and I think I can handle the rest. I've been leaning on you too hard. Suddenly, a wave of panic flooded through me. Promise you won't stay there. I said, promise. I would never. She said, even when Maddie was alive, I didn't like sleeping there. All those old antiques, I never liked the smell. But Maddie loved them, so, thank you, I said, trying to stay composed, for being so good to him. She reached out and gave me a big hug. I know you two hadn't hung out much over the last few years. But Maddie always said you were there when he needed him. She said, now I see what he meant. She looked over at my rental truck. There, in the bed, lay the wooden owl. Is that one of Maddie's? She asked. I was hoping you'd let me have it, I said, one last thing to remember him by. She shrugged. I've never seen it before. Maybe he'd just gotten it. Yeah, I said, could be. I said goodbye and got in the truck. And then I drove. I headed out in the city. Out where the urban sprawl gave way to some kind of forest, marked with a few sunny meadows. When I was satisfied that I'd reached the middle of nowhere, I stopped. I took the statue from the bed of the truck and dragged it out into a sunny field. All the while, I heard the skittering sound inside. It was getting hot, toward afternoon, and I could tell the heat and light was affecting the thing inside. I knew the wood was full of little cracks. Some of them must have been big enough to let the light through. It's still only noon, I said, not quite the hottest part of the day. That'll be hours from now. Maybe at 3 or 4. I wonder if you'll make it that far. A small shriek emerged from inside the owl. I ignored it. Now, over in the truck, I've got a saw. I continued. I could cut this owl shell of yours right in half and let the light take you. And I will. But first, I'm going to need you to ask for mercy. Story. Area 51 is a distraction. The real prize is in eastern Alaska. So, by this point everyone is no doubt well aware of the Area 51 memes and all the hubbub surrounding them. Apparently over 1 million people are set to storm the perimeter on September 20th of this year. Should be interesting. But let's be honest for a second. I doubt it will happen. And even if it did, even if by some ridiculous miracle they managed to overwhelm the most powerful military on Earth and infiltrate a top-secret base, I don't think they would be exactly thrilled with the results. I'll just come right out and say it, I guess. Area 51 is a red herring. It's a distraction, and it pretty much always has been. Nothing out there but sand, reclusive scientists and some crusty-ass lake at this point. I mean, think about it. If Area 51 is one of the most top-secret and covert black sites in the world, then why does everyone know about it? How secret can a secret be if everyone knows the secret? For God's sake. Even Obama acknowledged its existence a while back. That's the whole point of it. They want you distracted, so you don't look for the others. But why take my word for it? Who am I anyways? Just some pleb on the internet that decided to cash in on a trend for some clout and perhaps a bit of that sweet karma, right? Well, yes, but actually no. That may be who I am now. But I was once a person of particular interest to the United States government. Most people knew me as Mr. Blue. Not my real name, but it is easier to pronounce. I used to be a pilot. Did that for many years and loved every second of it. I tell ya, there's nothing quite like soaring through the skies and breaking the sound barrier for the first time. You might crap your pants a little, but it's all just part of the experience, really. Now, unfortunately, the type of work I did was above top secret, and for all of our safeties I cannot go into any further detail on what I actually did, or who I actually worked for. One day, I was out on a calcified reconnaissance mission in a certain area where I should not have been. I'll apologize here for the vague details of certain things. But you gotta understand, the things I'm about to tell you are beyond top secret. They would kill me 10 times over for uttering a word of it. So here's to hoping that doesn't happen. Anyways, the mission was going as planned, when suddenly my instruments started going berserk on my dash. Air pressure inside the cabin just plummeted and the speed and fuel consumption gauges looked like they were playing ping pong with each other. Everything began to rattle like crazy, and my alarms erupted into a symphony of irritation. Next thing I know, I see this bright light soar past me at an ungodly speed. The shockwave it produced was so violent that it shredded the hull of my craft. In a split second, I went from casually flying along to suddenly regaining consciousness as I plummeted headfirst towards the ground at terminal velocity. I managed to pull my chute before I splattered, but as I touched down, I almost wished I hadn't. There I was met by an awaiting entourage of at least 24 men in winter camo suits and masks. They all pointed their weapons at me and screamed in a language which I recognized as English. I tried my best to calm them down and appear unthreatening. But that didn't stop them from wrenching me into a pair of handcuffs and hauling me into one of their APCs. They began to drive away. And the real severity of the situation hit me. I was not going to be saved. The people I worked for had never said it. But it was always well known that if ever you were captured, then you were pretty much on your own. With that in mind, I had no real incentive to keep my mouth shut once they started interrogating me. It may seem cowardly, but I was not about to be brutally tortured for a former ally which would never come to bail me out. Yeah, the government says they don't torture people. But trust me, when they really want to know something, there's no tactic too extreme. And they really wanted to know something. So, I told them about who I worked for, what my mission was, where I grew up, all that jazz. It was all fabricated. But they took the bait regardless thanks to their severe distrust of the Russians at the time. They were actually pretty cool after that. I mean, they wouldn't let me leave their custody. But that was better than being dead. Or at least it was at first. They transported me away from my initial interrogation place into a secure facility somewhere nearby. I was blindfolded the whole time. But from the rumbling of multiple vehicles, sounds of doors sliding open multiple times, and the distinct feeling of my stomach dropping, I could tell they had taken me somewhere deep underground. Soon after that, I stepped off the elevator and they removed my blindfold. Their leader was a guy with a stern face, thick gray beard, and eyes that looked etched from concrete. He wore a black suit, with some symbol upon his heart pocket that I didn't recognize. He stepped in front of everyone and outstretched his arms while staring me in the eye. "Welcome to your new home." An ever so slight grin slithered onto his face as he said it. I glanced down the dismal gray hallways, which seemed to stretch out further than I could see in multiple directions. They lead me down the hall on the right, past dozens of locked corridors and rooms before ushering me into a cell. My handcuffs were removed soon after, and the door slid shut behind me. The same man that had welcomed me to the facility then approached the window and pushed the intercom button. "We appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Blue. I don't believe there is any reason why our time spent together has to be unfriendly. I apologize for all of this. But you must realize that this is a necessary precaution we must take. I hope you understand." I took a moment, then nodded back to him. "Wonderful. We will have dinner sent to you soon. If you require anything, then please notify one of the guards outside of your quarters." And with that, he and his little entourage turned and strolled down the hallway. That was my very first night in the facility I eventually came to know as FEZ. I don't think it's the official name, but I heard several personnel at the base refer to it by that acronym over the years. I still don't know exactly what it stands for. Forbidden Enclosed Ziggurat? Forsaken Evil Zoo? Forced Ejaculation Zeal? Fabulous Elf Zombies? The best I could really come up with was Fortified Experimental Zone. It makes the most sense too, all things considered. At first it wasn't actually too bad. The staff was nice. They cooked great food, and there was plenty to see around the base. Although every once in a while, I would hear the screams just barely echoing through the vents. They interviewed me probably 100 more times after that, and were especially interested in the craft which I was piloting. The craft in question was one of our own top-secret technologies. But unfortunately it had been blown to smithereens by whatever that light was. So I couldn't tell them much about it. It took years of incarceration there. But eventually the staff came to trust me almost as much as they did their own comrades. We would laugh and joke with one another. And soon enough we became what some might even consider to be friends. I became especially close with one of the scientists there named Kevin. Kevin was a smart guy, comical too, and explained quite a lot of things to me. He and I would spend hours talking on countless occasions. He was my only real glimpse into what was happening in the outside world. He'd bring in books and movies for us to enjoy together. He kept me updated on everything. And over the next 30 years we developed a close friendship that I will always treasure. I must have displayed some kind of intellectual potential, because they eventually started asking for my input on various curiosities stationed throughout the base. They only did it because I had sworn them complete loyalty and would never be allowed to leave the base anyways. But for me, it was just nice to feel included. The base itself was absolutely colossal. They always blindfolded me during transport to any location. But one time I caught a glimpse of the buttons in the elevator. There had to have been at least 50 of them on that panel. I remember the first time they showed me one of the lockdown blocks. There were guards posted at every cell, and I heard some very strange noises emanating around me as we traversed the halls. I thought for sure they were about to show me some horrendous beast from the depths of hell, and prepared myself accordingly as the howls of unseen things echoed throughout the halls. The lead scientist, Dr. Roosevelt, rolled back a two-way mirror curtain and my heart froze from anticipation. In the cell before us, there was nothing more than a human girl in a gray jumpsuit. She was young, maybe 5 years old or so, but there seemed to be nothing out of the ordinary about her. I looked to Dr. Roosevelt, and he flexed his cranial muscles before pressing a button. I heard the sound of gas seep into the room. A few tense seconds passed, when the girl suddenly shrieked like a banshee. Her head tilted back and I saw jagged, needle-like teeth emerge from her mouth. Her jet-black eyes then lurched towards us, and she lunged at the window. She struck it hard, and fell back to the ground, snarling and hissing like some ravenous jackal. Dr. Roosevelt then pressed the button again, cutting the gas and posing a question. "You ever seen anything like her, Mr. Blue?" All I could do was shake my head slowly as I watched the young demon child stalk about on the other side of the glass. They found her in the woods outside of Whitehorse with a freshly disemboweled man. She was eating him, and appeared unaffected by the sub-zero temperatures. I suddenly felt like vomiting. But I said nothing, only stared back at the unusually gruesome little girl. What the hell was she? Unfortunately, I never was told anything else about her. And I doubt the personnel knew much more anyways. They came to show me a lot of very strange things over the years. A giant brownish orange-haired primate that walked upright and seemed to respond to facial movements. A humanoid-shaped being that was only detectable via infrared equipment. A golden chest that would instantly kill anything that touched it. A 10-foot-tall creature wrapped in vines that emitted bouts of radiation and blended into environments with perfect camouflage. A monstrous fish at least 80 feet in length, frozen in nitrogen. Various abhorrent creatures that I'm guessing were the results of relentless genetic tampering. I had never seen anything like it. All of the monstrosities housed there, and the secrets buried in their possession. They also asked for my advice on a certain paradoxical phenomenon that had plagued them as well. They told me that for decades there had been hundreds of unsolved cases of human disappearances that seemed to defy all explanation. Young children would be found on cliff edges that they could not have possibly reached, while old and frail people would be discovered dozens of miles away from where they had last been seen only a few hours later. Most of them would never be found at all though. I could almost see the fear dripping from their eyes as they relayed case after case of the recorded incidents. And it was clear, although not said, that they had no idea what the cause was. Unfortunately, neither did I, as it was the first I'd ever heard of the bizarre phenomenon. I told them honestly that I didn't believe my former allies were responsible. But I don't know if that made them feel better or worse. Throughout all of my years there I had always found one thing peculiar. After all the weird and terrifying things they showed to me, there was never any mention of extraterrestrials. That's what everyone thinks these black site facilities house after all. But nevertheless they made no mention of it. That made me smile a bit when I thought about it, because they had no idea how close they were. The closest thing they had was this weird tentacle creature with a ringed set of teeth in its mouth. It looked almost like an eel, but possessed 4 iridescent green eyes in a ring around its head. It didn't live in the water either, but instead slithered around on the ground in a very swift and very unsettling motion. They said its DNA resembled nothing like anything they had ever found on Earth before. Hence the reason they believed, but were not certain of its otherworldly origins. Kevin and I got to talking back in his quarters one night. As the rest of the crew retired for the evening, he shared with me a bit of his brandy, and we were content to just chat as friends late into the night. He told me a lot about himself that he had never mentioned before. He showed me pictures of his wife and his son that had been taken from him. Kevin admitted his son had died in a car crash a couple years back, while his wife passed 2 years later of cancer. It broke my heart to hear that, and I felt sorrow for my dear friend of some 30 years. Kevin was in his early 50s, but you'd never know it with the enthusiasm in his voice. It was during that conversation Kevin ended up mentioning something I found particularly interesting. He told that he believed that if an alien species existed, and were advanced enough to traverse the galactic canopy and reach Earth, then they would obviously be quite intelligent. He said he didn't believe in any of the Hollywood depictions of doomsday aliens hell-bent on destroying humanity. He thought they'd be a lot more subtle than that. Think about it. You find something intelligent which represents almost no threat to you, and the first thing you do is try to kill it? Kevin asked skeptically, as I considered his words for myself. That'd just be a waste. And no species that fancies themselves as advanced beings would do something so brash, at least I hope they wouldn't. He chuckled slightly and shot me a knowing look mixed with a unique intrigue that almost glistened in his gray eyes. Even if they thought we were destroying our own planet or something, why would they care? There are trillions of other planets in the Milky Way alone. They could pick any of them if they wanted natural resources. I chuckled to myself, almost sensing where the conversation was headed. It's not the planets they're after, I replied. Kevin snapped, and pointed his finger at me as his face lit up. Exactly. They'd want to study us. Learn how we operate, how we organize and how we live. Kevin's hand motions turned eccentric, and I saw his access badge jostle around his neck. He took another sip of brandy and continued. They'd probably learn more about us than we even know about ourselves. I mean, granted they have to be more intelligent. They could learn up close, understand how humans work. They'd have no need for bloodshed when they could simply inconspicuously integrate into human culture. They have no doubt mastered the art of altering their biology to disguise themselves as humans. I mean, that's nothing when compared with the tech they used to get here. You know? He paused from his enthused monologue and wiped the steam off his glasses. I just sat back, content to let him continue, as I found it fascinating that he could know so much. Aliens, they're not warlords. They're poets, architects, authors, musicians, beings that wish to create. It is the ultimate calling for an entity so powerful. Kevin took a deep breath, and reveled in his own explanation. His speech had turned a bit slurred, and I could see his eyes floating lazily in their sockets. He then met my eyes in a look that he had never given to me before. It was a look that seemed to shed all sense of formality, and pose a question which he had long since suspected the answer to. You're not really from Russia, are you? The sudden accusation caught me off guard, and I felt my stomach drop like a lead weight. I didn't say anything, and Kevin just scoffed. You had everyone fooled, and I mean, I was too for the longest time. You had a suitable backstory, authentic sounding accent. All the alibis you gave us checked out. He paused and clasped his hands in front of him. You look so authentic too. But there was one thing you missed. One thing that you just can't fake. He looked me deep in the eyes and fell silent. He didn't have to say it, for I already knew what he meant. The eyes are impossible to truly fake. That night your craft was shot down. What were you doing here? Kevin and I maintained a prolonged dialogue before I finally responded. Reconnaissance. For the first time in decades I dropped the Russian accent, as it was clear there was no longer any reason to lie to my dear friend. And what did you see? Kevin stared into the very depths of my soul as he asked. And I spoke the truth. Beauty, poetry, creators. Much like us. Kevin just stared at me for the longest time, as if he were weighing my soul in his mind. I wondered what he planned to do since he had found out. But I didn't ask. Kevin eventually smiled, and rose to make his way to the cell door. He reached into his coat pocket, and withdrew a black steel pistol with a long snout. I slowly met his gaze. And he chuckled. Mr. Blue, do you wish to go home? I nodded after pausing to think for a moment. Kevin looked over his weapon, and primed it for use. I hope your allies can forgive us. Without another word, he flashed his security badge and the locks on the door gave way. He motioned for me to rise and follow. And so I did. Kevin glanced back and forth down the hallway. But due to the late hour, there was no one around. He and I sprinted down the corridor and onwards to one of the security booths. He flashed his badge as I hid just out of sight. He entered the room, and I heard the noise of a brief scuffle before two bright flashes ended it. Kevin re-emerged with wild eyes, and beckoned me to follow. He and I dashed down the hallway and reached the massive mainshaft elevator soon after. For the first time I entered without a blindfold, and Kevin punched the button to the top floor and the security code required to power it. Security system will be down for a good half hour, but automated distress beacons have already been activated. That gives us about 8 minutes. Kevin dropped the clip from his pistol and popped in a fresh one. I saw spackles of blood on his glasses and cheek, and a frenzied look in his eye. "Here, take this." He reached out his hand, and held something which I had not seen in decades. The old radio from my craft. I took it, and he and I met eyes as the elevator door opened. It was back to running after that. But a few minutes of it and we had reached an underground parking facility. Kevin quickly unlocked a nearby vehicle, and the two of us hopped in as he fired it up. The engine roared to life, and Kevin accelerated through the lot. A moment later and we exited the underground facility, and I saw my first vision of the night sky in over 4 decades. There were men stationed at the perimeter gates that attempted to stop us. But Kevin didn't flinch. He crashed right through the wire fence on the perimeter, causing multiple lights to activate in our wake. I heard a siren blaring behind us, and the silhouettes of people dashing throughout the snow. "There's a suit in the back. Put it on." I did as he requested without question, and fit the snug polyester garment over my body. It covered every square inch from foot to the nape of my neck, and felt incredibly comfortable. "There's a dial on your right side. You can use it to mask your body heat. They're gonna be after you." He tossed a map into my lap and continued barking instructions. "You can contact your friends with that radio, right?" His eyes flashed to me as he slid onto the main road and away from the compound. "Yes." Kevin nodded. "Make your way north. They won't be expecting that. There's a river up there about 30 miles away through the forest. Once you find it, head east until you find a small town. Ask the guy at the post office for Mr. White. He's a friend of mine who's agreed to help you. He'll take it from there." I tried to digest the flow of information as best as I could and remain confident. It had all just happened so suddenly. "I stashed you some MREs in the bag. Should last you a good couple of weeks." Kevin then swerved around a corner and reoriented us onto a new dark road. In the sudden influx of adrenaline, a sudden though occurred to me. "What happens to you?" Kevin didn't seem to want to acknowledge the question. "Forget about that. Just get back to your people." Behind us a flurry of lights suddenly ascended into the night sky. The whirring sound of rotary blades then pierced the tranquil canopy of the blustery night. "Shit, I had hoped I could get you a bit farther than this." He suddenly slammed on the brakes. My head lurched forward and the car spun back and forth along the icy road. "Take this too." He handed his long barrel pistol over, and I hesitantly took it. He and I then met eyes for one final time. "This is where we say goodbye, Mr. Blue. Why are you doing this for me?" Kevin sighed, and I saw a certain sorrow swirl into his ironclad pupils. He stayed silent a moment, and only when the sounds of approaching engines grew louder was he spurred to reply. "You don't belong here. You don't belong in a cage. I don't know where you come from, But I want you to see the ones you love again." His eyes began to water, and he jostled his neck before looking me in the eye one final time. "I hope you don't think of us as captors, or kidnappers. I hope you see us as you see yourself. I just hope you can understand." A single tear then rolled down his cheek. I put my hand on his shoulder. "I always have, and I always will. Thank you, Kevin." I then held out my hand and he grabbed it tight as we shared one final moment. Before I ventured into the blizzard, the journey from then on was long and arduous, with me spending weeks trudging through snow and frozen forests. Hounds, men and machines pursued me for days, but somehow, I was able to elude their efforts. The terrain was brutal, unrelenting, but eventually I managed to find the river which Kevin had mentioned. By that point, all of my pursuers had long since gone silent. I followed the river, and found the town, and soon after the man known as Mr. White. He was a kind man, and gladly invited me into his house to avoid the agents. It is there that I have been ever since, awaiting my ally's arrival. They were stunned to hear from me again, but not as stunned as I was to find out the radio was still functional. They weren't entirely sure whether they could even trust me anymore, but I didn't leave them much of a choice when I threatened to go public and expose them to the world. They finally agreed, but admitted it would be months before they could reach me. I expected as much, and thankfully Mr. White allowed me to stay with him and await their eventual arrival. I found out soon after that my dear friend Kevin, to whom I owe my freedom and life, had been found deceased. The authorities ruled it a suicide, gunshot wound to the back of the head. But obviously I have my doubts about that. It truly broke me to learn of my one true friend's demise. But I knew it was what he expected. I like to think that is why he chose to do it. And furthermore, it is the reason I am here posting this now. Kevin's legacy deserves to live on. And this is the only way I know how to do it. And with that, we have come full circle to this message you are reading right now. To address the original topic, Area 51 is indeed a reuse. Kevin held a lot of power in his previous role, and he told me all about the operation. The real prize is the Fez, my former prison, somewhere in eastern Alaska, buried beneath the snow with all sorts of abhorrent things in its clutches. If you're going to storm anywhere, that should be the place. Just remember to pack a coat. Kevin was a smart man. Brilliant even. If you've managed to make it this far, then I'd like to think you are someone like him. Brave, curious, and with an almost innate sense of wonder that cannot be satiated. It is my hope that Kevin's ideas will live on through you. My allies would never approve of this message, but I know now that they are wrong. Truth is something that all sentient beings should be allowed to perceive. Despite how unpleasant it may be to hear it, it was Kevin's belief that the beings he knows as aliens are already here. That instead of murdering humans as is often portrayed in stories, they would blend in, take keen interest in human culture, society and art, write books, poetry and music in hopes of connecting to something truly extraordinary, something that reminds them of themselves. If Kevin is right, then maybe one day, you'll even stumble upon such a story for yourself. Maybe you'll think it nothing more than a work of fiction to entertain you for a while. Maybe the author of said theoretical story would seem like nothing more than your run-of-the-mill internet user. He probably wouldn't just come right out and say it, because that would be entirely too corny. He would probably just leave you the pieces, and hope that you could understand the truth for yourself. Maybe you truly are like Kevin, drawn to mystery and prepared to entertain the fantastic. Maybe you'll just dismiss the implications of the words before you because you don't dare believe something so outlandish. Because in the end, truth is not the problem. Belief is. Maybe someone will understand who, or more importantly, what I really am. Maybe it will be you. Either way, I've been away for a very long time. It is time for me to go home. Thank you, Kevin. I will always uphold our agreement. Story. When I was 13 years old, I solved mysteries with my friends. Case 11. The disappearance and subsequent brainwashing of Aris Kane. Middleview, the town I grew up in, is not real. Neither were the first 15 years of my life as a teen detective. I know what Middleview is, and the people behind it. I know who murdered my friends, and to an extent, I know who I am. So now, I'm asking one more simple question. I still have so many, and those will be answered in due course. The third passenger in my mother's car. The identity of the person she saved along with me. Cutting them from their strings. Not to mention the truth behind Middleview's puppeteer. But one question still remains, haunting the back of my mind since I started to take notice of my own delusions. Figments of my imagination carved into my friends' faces. I imagined them because I didn't want to come to terms with the reality of who and what I discovered the night I found them again. The mayor's son, Noah Prestley, no longer existed as a human being. A thing made up of patchwork skin and muscle and bone molded into a puppet. Aris Kane's head was completely hollowed out, his spine twisted and modeled into a stand for his puppeteer. Mei Li's lips had been split apart, a permanent grin jerking left to right with her strings. But even as my imaginary friends, something is far too real about them. Through fragments inside my memory, I saw older versions of them. I saw them inside the facility when I was hopped up on wacky gas. And then again, deep inside the memories my mother had attempted to wipe away. So, I ask myself this: who exactly are the Middleview Four really? Presently, my mind was being tugged left and right, like I was still stuck on strings. Ever since Dr. Delaney dived inside my skull to find the identity of the kid my mother saved. My mind was no longer part of me. Instead, what felt like a detached videotape stuck in rewind. My memories were not in chronological order. Instead, a non-linear mess. They hit me when they wanted to hit me. So, it was less like going down memory lane, and more like being forcibly drowned inside my own mind. Plunged into the darkness. Memories that had been suppressed and wiped away. It's like throwing up, completely out of my control. This particular memory was like poison being poured inside my brain. But I couldn't keep a grip on reality. Instead, I was plunging deeper. My memories were like waves crashing onto a seafront. One comes in, while the others are thrown back. And I couldn't stop it. Fighting it like a virus striking through my blood. I was clinging onto the real world, which was fading fast, my vision blurring. I held onto where I was. I was inside my mom's office. The sun was bleeding away into early twilight, and I was desperately holding onto every streak of light filtering through the curtains. I was aware I was still hallucinating Noah Presley. But even he was blurring in and out of view. Noah did not make sense. The more I was getting to know this version of him, this snapshot I had imagined into existence, I was slowly coming to realize it wasn't just this memory of him that didn't make sense. I didn't know his past self either. I didn't know the reason behind him seemingly getting older, despite dying at 15, drenched in shadows that were threatening to engulf him completely. The mayor's son was standing in front of me, arms folded, head inclined. He felt right, comfortable, like he was my home. Noah was still stepping on my toes, just like he did when we were kids, rocking back and forth on his heels. Murrin? Noah's features were slowly bleeding away, reddish dark hair becoming inky nothing. Those last fragments of him fading into shadows dancing around the room. His sing-song voice sounded real, drifting in and out of my ears, like a whisper in the wind. But as reality and memory began to blur, his voice was growing louder, a muffled yell plunging me inside a memory. I existed in two places at once. Reality, standing in my mom's office, and Middleview, tied back to back with the mayor's son. Marin. Fuck. Wake up. Where are we? It was pitch dark, and my head was hurting. Concussion? No, but I had definitely hit my head. I could feel an ooze of warmth. Blood, trickling down my temple. My wrists were expertly bound together, entangled with nose. There was something sticky over my mouth. Duct tape. I was used to being kidnapped, so being gagged wasn't usually a problem for me. I just licked the inside until it was pasty enough to spit out. When we were kids, the people we hunted down were more tame and cartoon-like. Aris called them Scooby-Doo villains. They were cat burglars and vegetable thieves. But the older we got, the more dangerous these people became. We started to come face to face with sea-time bosses and child killers. By the age of 13, I was aware I wasn't invincible, and Middleview's psychos would kill us if they had the chance. However, what I wasn't counting on was being betrayed by one of our own. I'm going to kill him. Noah was our usual damsel in distress, the Middleview 4 member who was always getting himself knocked out and dragged to second locations. Despite being the brawn in our group, he had even mastered the ability to speak through a gag. According to him, it just took practice, and being tied up for long periods of time with nothing to do but scream into the masses of tape slapped over his mouth had been the perfect opportunity. In this case, he was screaming, struggling violently in his chair. I wouldn't call it communicating. I was still trying to figure out where we were. It looked like an old barn. Tipping my head back, I could see a half-crescent moon drowned in eerie white light poking through a hole in the roof. With another yelp, Noah almost sent the two of us toppling over when he violently threw himself forwards. I could understand why he was so upset, but he was going to attract attention. Twisting in my chair, the barn was empty, for now. If Noah kept muffled screaming and rocking back and forth in his chair, that would change. Noah, I spoke calmly through the uncomfortable stickiness over my mouth, grasping for his clammy hands. He's fucking dead, the mayor's son muffled wailed, throwing his head into mine. The impact was painful, but I don't even think he felt it. I had to push down the overwhelming urge to slam my skull into his in retaliation. How could he do this to us? Noah's voice choked into a sob. I always knew there was something shady about him joining us. And I even questioned it when we were kids. Yet somehow I was the crazy one for suggesting the weird British kid who inserted himself into our gang was going to betray us. Except, that's not what you said. I hit back. You didn't like him because you wanted to be the only boy in the gang. Noah spluttered. I was 10, and that doesn't even matter. You're changing the subject because I'm right this time. Fuck. He was so annoyingly, infuriatingly right. I had come to realize my best friend was a lot more sensitive than I thought. Noah valued the four of us less like a group of friends, more akin to a family. Let him explain himself, I whispered. He's clearly in some kind of trance. That fast? Noah spat the tape off of his mouth. His voice more of a slur. I could still hear the effects of him being thwacked. You seriously believe someone fucked with Here's head within the space of 5 minutes? I'm not an expert on brainwashing. But that's not how it works. It takes time. Moron. Which means he's been playing us this whole fucking time. The bastard knocked me out with a golf club. Marin. He struggled again. And this time, I was out of patience. Letting my intrusive thoughts win. I should have asked my own questions. But I wanted to believe that our fourth member was always with us. Just like he had promised at the age of 10 years old when we officiated him joining us with a rainbow cupcake and playfully shoving the boy into the town lake. Noah was rightfully pissed. How could he do this to us? Frustrated, I knocked my head back into Noah's. Shut up. Impact this time was more satisfying than painful. I could practically hear the boy's drug-drunk brain bouncing around his skull. Ow! He shrieked. Twisting around. What was that for? Jumping to conclusions, I gritted out, half aware of a flashlight hitting me in the face. The beam danced across the wall in a tease, and I had to squeeze my eyes shut to avoid the scratching glare. Hey, Noah squirmed in his chair. His head fell on my shoulder, arms wriggling against mine. I know you're there, asshole. What the fuck is this? Shish. I shoved him this time. I highly doubt he's been conspiring against us since the 4th grade. I hissed. It's not him. Noah, I told you he's clearly under the influence. And what if it is him? He gritted back. Easy, I said, my lips curving into a smile I didn't understand. Poison in my mouth and bubbling in my blood. This feeling was foreign and new. It felt like my mouth was being stretched together and apart. Suddenly, my bound wrists felt stronger. Like I could twine my fingers around our 4th member's neck, snapping it in two. We kill him. The words were not mine, and yet slipped from my lips so effortlessly. I almost lost my breath. Words were suddenly so hard. Soup on my tongue and choking my brain. Noah's sharp intake of breath jolted something inside my mind. I could sense the boy's reply in his taut muscles. Goosebumps prickling up and down his bare arms. His stiffening back, but he didn't say it. Even then, something was being pulled inside the two of us. Contorting our limbs, our thoughts and speech. I couldn't see his face. But just from the tone of his voice, I knew Noah was smiling. Right, he whispered, his voice more of a breath. We kill him. Despite his words, Noah's body was struggling to act complacent. He knew something was wrong. But I don't think he could speak. If I squinted my eyes through the blinding flashlight in my face. I could see them. Lines. Lines that were above me and below me. Crisscrossing and entangling. I already knew they existed. In every instance I saw them. I was told to forget them. I was told I wasn't allowed to look at them. But not this time. We were awake. You can see them, right? Noah breathed. Yeah. This time. There were no voices in my head to look away and avert my gaze. No piercing eyes to tell me to forget. It was just me and Noah. And the suffocating control both of us were now fully aware of. I opened my mouth to correct myself. To demand answers from the shadow looming closer to us. When my mind retracted again. Detaching itself from the memory and plunging further down. I had no time to breathe. No time to anchor myself to reality. Where I was kneeling on my mother's sheepskin rug. Warm red pooling down my face with my imaginary friend standing over me. It was going to kill me. I thought dizzily. My words felt distant and wrong. Disconnected from my body. Whatever this thing was, what Dr. Delaney had planted inside my mind, was going to fucking kill me. If I could liken this feeling to anything, it would be drowning, suffocating in oblivion, dragging me down, down, down. The memory was agony, already sending my brain into a spasm. I remember waking up, my throat filled with blood. I was lying on my back. A halo of fake hair spread around me. I opened my mouth to scream when agonizing pain ripped through me. A cutting blade just missing my face. Except I didn't have a mouth. I didn't yet have arms or legs. I just had eyes that were wide and wrong and misplaced. Drinking in the world around me that felt far too big. Blinking my new eyes while the start of my lips stretched wider. I could feel my throat muscles twitching. But I didn't have a voice yet. The room was made up of 4 concrete walls and each one had its own pattern. The first wall was covered in old entrails, while the second and third were spattered with old and new crimson. Like someone's idea of a twisted canvas. There were figures wearing pale blue masks. They talked about my body parts like meat. Above me hung a monster made of metal. A humming beast that ran up and down a body I could not yet feel. I could see red string bleeding from parts of me that were not yet attached. Glittering red. Pretty ruby red seeping over the edge of my bed. It was so beautiful. Real and red. I felt my not mouth choking with sobs. The figures ignored me when I struggled. They left after a while. And the machine stopped. Slimy red strings still clinging to its blade. They were part of me. All the way down my torso and threaded through my arms and legs like artificial veins. Strings. Strings that I could feel entangled with my flesh and bone. Every organ, even my breath, attached to my new mouth. The figures came back to play with my lips and prod at my eyes. And then left me again. Lying in my own blood. My gaze flickering across ceiling tiles. When the machine started up again, I finally had a mouth to scream. Forcing my tongue through the stitches cruelly holding my lips together. Until a silhouette appeared, looming over me. Time had passed. I wasn't sure how much time. But it was enough for me to notice bright red light bathing him in a hellish glow. Dressed in blue hospital scrubs. A mask over his face. This boy looked a little too young to be a nurse. There were things about him that stuck out to me. Familiarity bleeding into my foggy mind. I recognized his eyes already pinched with irritation. thick sandy blonde hair that had grown out into mousy curls. When he grasped for my strings, pinning me to the table, I blurted out a cry. Aris Kane pulled his mask down with one hand, slamming his palm over my mouth with the other. "It's me," he manically gestured to his face. "Shush. If you keep screaming like that, you're going to get us caught." Now fully aware, I drank all of him in. His hospital scrubs were definitely stolen, belonging to a Dr. Layworth. Tucked into the pocket was a scalpel and a pair of scissors. Aris lifted his own arm which, like mine, was bleeding strings entangled with his veins. He sliced them away easily, before untying my left wrist. The boy leaned close, shuddering breath tickling my cheeks. "Do you remember senior year?" he whispered, his fingers working to untangle my strings. "You had a panic attack and walked out of your exam. So, we sat in my car with Chipotle and did breathing exercises." Aris inhaled, coaxing me to do the same, while he cut my strings. And like severing an umbilical cord, it hurt. When they were sliced and cut into, it felt like I was being ripped apart. Aris puffed out his chest. "You breathe in for 4 seconds. Hold it for 7 seconds. And then exhale for 8 seconds." I did exactly what he said, forcing myself to drag in air and hold it. "Wait," I said, my mind fuzzy. "Who are you?" Aris's smile dampened. "It's complicated." When I gave him a quick nod to signal I was okay, he gently pulled me off of the table. Immediately, my legs gave way, but Aris was already wrapping his arm around my shoulder. He led me toward the exit, and I glimpsed half of a torso pinned to another table, a limp arm hanging off of the edge. Everything I was seeing was unfinished. Severed parts and heads, abandoned saws stained dripping scarlet. In the eerie white glare of the emergency lights, Aris Kane's fingers were slick scarlet. His scrubs were stained, painted, like he was its canvas. Aris led us onto a white hallway, warning lights flashing in his face. There were bodies everywhere. "Can you run?" I managed a shaky nod. We made it halfway down the hallway before a woman appeared with a gun. Aris stumbled to a stop, and she pointed the gun between his eyes. Her fingers expertly wrapped around the handheld. "Look," Aris nudged me, and I followed his gaze. Strings. I could see them dangling from the woman, making her dance. She opened her mouth to speak, only for her throat to open up, sliced straight across by an invisible hand. I blinked. No, not an invisible hand. Noah Presley, who was standing behind her, his fingers wrapped around the scalpel protruding from her throat. His clothes confused me. A paper-thin hospital gown hanging off of a much thinner frame tucked into a pair of jeans. His cheeks were gaunt and malnourished. Those same teasing eyes a lot more hollow than I remembered. Like Aris, Noah's reddish curls had grown out, tousled and uneven. When the woman dropped to the ground, he stepped forward, a tall brunette standing by his side. May. Somehow, she was even more beautiful. Her pigtails were longer, a thick fringe glued to her forehead. May was paler than I remembered. Her skin complexion had been played with, transforming her into more a porcelain doll. The white hospital gown hanging off of her almost blended with her skin. I took notice of the curve in her jawline. Brand new green eyes, instead of the steel pipe stained scarlet clutched in her fist. May caught my gaze. doing her best to hide the pipe. Noah ducked to pull the scalpel from the dead woman's throat, wiping it on his pants, and then jumped to his feet, flashing me a grin. Yo. His gaze flicked to Aris, and like a disapproving dad, he scowled. What the fuck, dude? We leave you for 5 minutes and you go on a killing spree? Aris folded his arms. It was necessary, he said, pulling us into a run. As usual, Aris led, Noah at his side. I stumbled alongside them. We reached a door and he held up the ID tag he'd stolen. Thankfully, the light flashed green. We've gotta get out of here before they bring out their secret weapon. The roof is 10 floors up, and I only took out the guards on this level. May swung the pipe, bringing up the rear. How many? Too many, Noah said. The three's synergy took me off guard. May acted as a guard. She walked slowly, scanning every corner for pursuers. When I stepped in front of a camera, she grabbed my shoulders gently and shoved me forwards, urging me to run. Aris tossed the ID tag to Noah, and he caught it, throwing it over his neck. Another door opened, and we slid through. Aris was already ahead, out of breath. So, are you ever going to tell us about what happened in the factory? May kept to his side, throwing open a fire door. You really want to do this now? Well, yeah, if she's the only one who remembers. Noah scoffed. I think it's pretty fucking obvious she has no idea who we are. Stop. The small voice crackling through overhead speakers brought us to a standstill, jerking back on our strings. I thought they were gone. But sure enough, there they were, bleeding from my arms and legs, holding us in place. We did stop, our bodies freezing, bobbing along on scarlet strings. The little girl's breathing was labored, her sobs pulling me left to right. I want you to stop, she gritted out, and Noah dropped to the floor. I want you to stop moving. To stop breathing. To stop. 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 Her tantrum filled my skull, severing control over my body. I felt my knees hit hard marble. All of the breath sucked from my lungs. The sound of heavy footsteps flooded my ears and I was limp. My head hanging. My body more of a marionette in a stranger's arms. Speak. The girl mumbled, and my mouth opened, my lips painfully coming apart to mimic her exact words. In the corner of my eye, the others were doing the same. I belong to Marin, the creator of Middleview, the girl cried. And so did my mouth. I belong to Marin, the creator of Middleview. I will not try to escape again. My teeth clashed together, mimicking hers. I will not try to escape again. If I do, I will become a real doll. If I do, I will become a real doll. She paused. Look at me. I want you to look at me. My head snapped up, my gaze trained on the camera blinking down at us. You're too old, our puppeteer grumbled. I liked you at first because see, you were like my older brothers and sisters and fit inside my puppet show. But there's one teensy problem. I was pulled forward, my head snapping back. The Middleview Four are always teenagers. Aris dropped to his knees. They never grow up. May was tossed to the side. They stay in Middleview and solve mysteries forever and ever. And stay best friends until the end of time. She let out a giggle that chilled me to the bone. So, you're not going to grow up. I'm going to make you into real puppets. And you're going to stay in Middleview forever. Doesn't that sound like fun? One of us tried to escape. tried to tear from their strings. I had no idea who it was, but if I could guess by the sharp hiss next to me, it was the mayor's son. Noah was yanked back, and so were the rest of us. She screamed in frustration, her fingers tightening around our strings. "Don't leave me." The little girl started to cry, and something warm hit my cheek. Rain. It ran down my brand new face, trickling into my mouth. The rain tasted like salt. "Why do you always try and leave me?" she sobbed. "I don't want you to leave." Rain. Rain took me back to a car ride down a seemingly endless road. Streetlights dancing in my eyes, and a starless sky. The memory was familiar by now. I was curled up, watching raindrops thunder against the glass of my window when my mother stopped singing, her fingers retracting from the third passenger's hand. In flashes of consciousness, the figure in the front seat fell limp, their head hanging forward. Mom gently coaxed their shoulder against the pane. I half wondered if she had drugged them too. I slept for a while, my body heavy from the drugs turning my brain to mush. In intervals, loud noises woke me up, only for the gentle lull of the car to send me falling. Mom continued to sing to the two of us, her soft voice swaying me into slumber. The slam of a car door woke me up, my eyes flying open. I was drooling on the window, a thin line of saliva sliding down my chin. Twisting my head to the left, it was my door that had slammed shut. Mom was back in her seat, phone to her ear, blinking rapidly through a thick layer of fog. I noticed the passenger seat was empty. "I have Peter Young," Mom said, glancing at the rearview mirror. I dropped my head to pretend I was sleeping, but Mom wasn't checking on me. It took me a disorienting moment for my heavy thoughts to untangle. There was something pressed against me, a heavy weight lying over my legs. The third passenger was a guy. In the corner of my eye, the figure was twisted like a pretzel, their head uncomfortably pressed against the right window, while I took the left. "Yes, he's still attached," Mom said, when my gaze found slimy strings still clinging to him, wrapped around his arms and legs. With him so close, I could almost pretend he was still human. But then I saw the back of his head, a shallow mess of strings bound around his spine, and something acidic slithered up my throat. I turned away from him. I didn't want to know who it was. Whoever it was, they were no longer who I remembered them as. I felt sick, my stomach twisting. The hollowed-out shell of one of the Middleview Four was lying lifeless over my legs, and I couldn't move to squirm away from them. Mom sighed. "I just want your promise that my daughter will stay out of whatever game you're playing." Her tone hardened. "I cut him down earlier." "Yes." Marin figured it out. Mom snorted out a laugh. "How am I supposed to track her movements? She's 23. Mom was seemingly cut off, letting out a frustrated hiss. "No. I told you my daughter is no longer part of it. If I have to, I will move her across the country." Her fingers tightened around the wheel. "Yes. I'm serious. I have Peter Young. Take him or leave him." Mom swerved right, avoiding an oncoming truck, its headlights searing my eyes. Well, that's your problem." "No, I'm not negotiating. If you want Peter, I'm about 10 minutes away. I gave him enough R95 so he's not going to be any trouble." "Yes, I can confirm he's just a doll. I don't think he's fully conscious." Mom was cut off again. Her fingers growing white around the wheel. Delaney wants inside her head. He's in charge of finding the missing kid. And Marin will be the first person on his list. Block my number after this meeting. When she ended the call, Mom slammed her fists into the wheel, and the third passenger jolted. Their legs stretching out. It was a lot more human than I'd realized. I didn't think puppets had leg cramps. I don't know how much time passed before I roused again. This time, the car had stopped. Rain was slamming against the window. But this time I could feel it soaking my hair and cheek. I was curled into the seat, my head pressed into rich-smelling leather. The car door was open. An icy breeze lashing against my cheeks and blowing my hair back. Mom was leaning over me, wrapping her arms around the third passenger, scooping the shell of a boy into her embrace. Cold. The soft croak dragged me out of slumber. I knew who it was. But I couldn't move. His voice was a hollowed-out cry. I couldn't call it human. His mouth jerking left to right. Still on strings. Why am I cold? Mom didn't react, squeezing the boy to her chest. I'm so cold. His voice whipped around in the wind. But I still heard it loud and clear. A human cry clinging onto long dead flesh. Kill me. She turned and strode directly into the downpour. The lifeless shell of my best friend hanging limp in her arms. Everything that had been him, illuminated in passing headlights whizzing past us. There was something wet in my lap. Strings. I held them up, dangling them between my fingers. My body was moving before I consciously knew what I was doing. Slipping out of the car, I fell directly onto my knees. I was still made of lead, my limbs heavy. I could see Mom's figure through half-lidded eyes. Lashes of rain gluing my hair to my face. She came to an abrupt stop suddenly, as if someone was pulling her strings, followed by the crack of a gunshot piercing the night. I remembered blindly crawling until my hands were damp, palms pressed into warm scarlet seeping across the road. Mom's eyes found me in the dark, wide, and slightly manic. She had already wiped her hands on the front of her shirt. Red smears decorating the seam. Her mouth formed a smile. And I was already stumbling back. See, Marin. Mom's voice rattled in my skull. She started forwards, wrapping her around me. Everything is going to be okay. She hummed. I got rid of the bad people. You're safe now. Back in the present. I was choking up bloody strings. My imaginary version of the mayor's son still hovering over me. It took me a moment to anchor myself, grabbing toilet paper and pressing it to my nose and mouth. Wow, Noah was back, less shadowy and more himself. He inclined his head, a swath of reddish curls slipping over his eyes. You don't look so good. What I knew for sure was Dr. Delaney was after the memory of the car ride. And I had no doubt he would be pursuing me again. There was no point in telling Noah. He was my subconscious. He'd seen it too. The mayor's son had seen everything. From our attempted escape, to the car ride revealing the identity of the puppet cut from their strings. Still, though, I couldn't get it out of my head that something was off about them. So, I asked him again, applying pressure to my nose. Why do you keep getting older? Noah's lips curled into a smirk. He folded his arms. You're a member of the Middleview Four. He teased. You've brought down first-grade milk thieves. druggy janitors, and evil teacher cults who brought the world crashing down. When I caught his eye, he pressed a finger to his lips. That's a spoiler. Noah chuckled. Anyway, you've been solving mysteries since we were little kids and you still haven't figured it out yet? Before I could open my mouth, he continued, bouncing on his heels. He was enjoying this. You still can't solve the mystery of who we are. I felt somewhat comfortable again, reveling in the warm light from my mother's lamp. Comfortable enough to hit him in the chest, which felt real. Noah settled me with a pitiful smile. You just technically hit yourself. I ignored him. You say it like it's easy. It is easy. He rolled his eyes. You're not much of a detective. Are you? You sound pissed. I am pissed. You call yourself a detective and yet you ignore clues literally right in front of you. It's screaming at you, right in the face, and you turn your head and pretend to be oblivious. Noah's eyes drank me in. Enveloped in darkness I was yet to know and understand. Are you scared? Noah stepped closer. Is that why you're choosing to be ignorant? Things are falling into place. But something tells me you don't want them to fall into place. For the first time in your life, you would rather the mystery of yourself and us remains unsolved. You killed all those townspeople. I said, why? I don't know. Marin, I'm not real. I tried again. Who is Peter Young? How am I supposed to know? It's your memory. Harsh. Aris was leaning against the door. His arms folded. These guys had a habit of appearing out of nowhere, bleeding into my line of vision. Aris blew hair out of his eyes. Can't you go a little easier on her? You're acting like memory diving and casually hallucinating your dead friends who don't make sense as an everyday thing. It's the truth. She's scared. Leave her alone. May mumbled from her place on the floor. She was sorting through the avalanche of papers knocked onto the carpet. She looked up, shooting them both death glares. She has a lot of bullshit to process. Idiots. Noah blew a raspberry. Yeah, such as the ever-growing question of who we are. There's one in particular that's driving her mad, but she's ignoring it. He was taking the words right out of my mouth. Noah Presley was fluctuating the more I got to know the memories of him. His eyes growing increasingly more void, ever since the broken jigsaw pieces in my head started to fit together. I had been growing more anxious of my own identity, and who the four of us really were. In reality, they were dead, puppets on strings in a stage play. Over the last few days, more and more details were sliding into place. Puzzle pieces I wish wouldn't fit. Closer to the truth. Closer to the identity of the boy in my mother's car who she saved. Closer to the answer behind them being dead at 15. And yet I had seen them a lot older. Covered in blood and armed with scissors. My imaginary friends couldn't decide on what age they were. There. Noah's voice surprised me. He was watching me, head cocked to the side. The mayor's son was thinking ahead. As usual, he was already joining the dots. He leaned forward and blew in my face. That infuriating smile growing. That's what's driving you mad, Marin. And it's scaring you too. Because, realistically, how possible is it for 3 15-year-olds to be killed, turned into mindless dolls, and then appear in your memories grown up? Noah followed my gaze. Oh, you have questions, but you don't want to ask them. The boy jutted his chin. You know what I'm talking about, right? I did. Aris. Inside the room drenched in red. He said something that stuck inside my head. May held up a crumpled piece of paper. It was the list of subjects. Zip it. Presley. Do you want to screw with her head even more? She jumped to her feet. So, we're all agreeing that these are the kids responsible for all of this? Aris nodded slowly. Makes sense. These little brats wanted dolls. And we were all they had. May perched herself on Mom's desk. Okay, so we start there. She nodded to me. The girl in your memory. May inclined her head. What did she do? Noah folded his arms when I choked on my response. See, she doesn't want to talk about the elephant in the room. Elephant? May frowned. I knew what he was talking about. But getting to that can of worms could wait. I've got this, Aris announced, striding over to me. It's just a matter of asking her questions that ignite memories. I read about it in a book. The boy turned back to me, cracking his knuckles. His smile was reassuring. But Aris Kane was just my subconscious. And my subconscious was demanding answers. Okay, so, tell me what we did in our last semester of high school. Noah's head snapped up. Seriously? Seriously. Aris ignored his glare. We want to know who we are. Right? The mayor's son looked comfortable leaning his head against the wall. Well, yeah, he did the scrunchy nose thing he did when he was trying to be pedantic. But isn't that too pushy? Says the guy who was grilling her to take another deep dive. May chuckled, flicking through one of Mom's books. Aris sighed. Like I said, I've got this. He twisted to me like I was his test subject. Senior year. What did we do? I had to swallow sour paste. Is that a trick question? No. I was aware of May and Noah's gazes burning into my back. Nothing, I said, my gut twisting into knots. Mom took me away the summer before sophomore year. You died and they brought you back as those things. Thinking back, I was hounded by the memory of being paralyzed in my mom's car. Bloody strings slipping through my fingers. A heavy weight across my legs. Aris held my gaze, his expression crumpling. It looked like he might say something before he snorted. Dancing back. Geez, when you put it like that, it sounds super depressing. Yes, but she's not answering your question. Noah was suddenly directly in front of me. In overexposed light, his hair resembled fire licking across his forehead. Yeah, we were brought back and turned into dolls. We've been through all of that 1,000 times. He held up his index. But, you're missing one vital detail. I said, what you did the night we searched the string factory. Noah's lips pricked. He raised a brow, lowering his voice. Oh, now you're blaming me? You really don't want to talk about the elephant. Huh? Stepping back, he winked at me. Suit yourself. You remembered most of the car ride. So, you just need to think. And stop dwelling on the past. Right? In the corner of my eye, a shadow hung from the ceiling. Blood seeped across the floor, pooling on my mom's desk. Aris let out a sharp hiss. May squeaking, lifting her feet up on the desk. Tipping his head back, Noah blinked through sharp red dripping onto his face, trickling down his cheek, just like when we found May. When the light caught his face, bringing his eyes to life. He was wearing his crown again. This crown was different from what I remembered. When he was gutted by the cult of kids, Noah's corpse wore a crown of entwined daisies as a way of declaring him no longer an omen. This one was made of blood-stained roses. A crown of glass and thorns. The boy whipped it off his head with a scowl. Straightening up. That's what I mean by dwelling on the past. Nice crown. Aris chuckled. Meanwhile, I was turned into hamburger helper. It's all yours. Noah threw it at the boy, who caught it, placing it on his own head. No offense, but I would rather be dragged through a meat grinder than be the so-called king of a cult run by our psychotic superfan. You're just saying that. No, I'm serious. I would rather be torn apart than be a Midsummer knockoff. I was dragged through spinning blades. You got impaled by a tree branch. Turning my attention away from their argument, I noticed the panel on the hidden door had changed. May appeared next to me with a smile. A keypad. She poked it. What are the chances of the code being 1234? Aris joined us, examining the keypad for himself. This thing seems to be both manual and biometric. If we go in there, there's a chance of it automatically locking us in. He shot me a grin. We did get locked inside the freezer in Lady Croft's mansion when we stupidly thought it was a good hiding place. But it's worth a try, right? Noah threw a screwed-up piece of paper at him. There's a 100% chance that the door is armed. Also, we got hypothermia and almost died. Genius. Aris tipped his head back. So, what do you propose we do? You heard Marin's mom. Delaney is coming back for her. Yeah, that was at the back of my mind. I'm still scared he's going to come back. Noah grinned. We meditate. What? Relax. I read about it in a book. He mocked Aris's accent. Aris threw a book at him. And easily dodging it, Noah situated himself in front of me, pressing his fingers to my temples. His eyes flickering shut. Just relax, okay? We can try going through your memories at our own pace. And not whatever the fuck Delaney did to you. That's your idea of meditating? May raised a brow. Noah cracked one eye open. It's all I got. His touch was familiar, strong enough to pull me back. Back to being tied back to back with Noah. Inside a ticking time bomb. The case that twisted both boys out of shape. And brought our painful reality crashing down on us. What I am guessing led Noah to become the infamous Middleview Strings murderer. Something I really do not want to see. I'm fucking terrified of seeing who he really is. Case 11. The disappearance. And subsequent brainwashing. Of Aris Kane. However, before I allowed myself to plunge, the question that had been haunting my mind finally slammed into me. Aris. The boy inclined his head. Yeah? I was already speaking before I could help it. My tongue tangling. You've been inside my memories asking me the same question. What happened in the strings factory? You guys keep asking me the same questions. Creeping into my head to try and get answers. But you want answers of your own that have nothing to do with my subconscious. You asked me about senior year, but we never had one. You told me I had a panic attack during my exam. But you died at 15 years old. Aris rolled his eyes. Thank you for once again reminding me of my untimely demise. Noah groaned, tipping his head back. Let her talk. No. I said, well, yes. You're dead. I saw you carved into a child's puppet. Thanks. I swallowed. It felt like the penultimate part of the mystery. When I was piecing things together, Noah was usually the one who said the speech, joining all the dots and ripping off the metaphorical mask. I could sense the boy watching me closely. Mouth curled. I swore every time I looked away from the mayor's son. His eyes were growing darker, more hollow, like he was waiting for something. But you remember a senior year when I had that panic attack. You remember being 17 years old. Which means, May slowly got to her feet, her eyes widening. We know what it means. It's obvious. What we need to figure out is how it's possible. Leaning against the wall, Noah wasn't smiling. I could almost mistake his expression for pain. Somehow, our fourth member grew up,